Hey, everybody. Welcome to Tuesday. It's another episode of Purple Process with Nick Miller. I was trying to think this morning, what should we talk about today? It doesn't really seem like there's anything going on with the Vikings. Oh, wait. Yeah, there's a lot to talk about. Let's get into it. Hey, everyone, unless you're living under a rock, we all know that Justin Jefferson came out of Sunday's game with a hamstring injury. The press conference after the game and yesterday by Kevin O'Connell gave us some indications that it might not be just a short-term thing and that he'd be back in the game against the Bears this week, but it might be long-term. And then this morning when we woke up, we got the news alert from our friend Tom Pelissero at NFL Network that this was going to be a serious injury, that Justin Jefferson was going to go on IR for 4 weeks. So obviously, when you take the Vikings' best player, and I don't think that it's crazy of me to say that Justin Jefferson is the Vikings' best player, and he is the stir that mixes the Vikings drink on offense. He's the one that the plays are set up around. He's the primary receiver on almost every single play, unless he's being used as a decoy. This has massive implications for the Vikings and their season. They also lost to the Chiefs this past week in kind of very frustrating fashion. It's been the same game over and over that we've seen from the Vikings this year of turnovers and mistakes, shooting ourselves in the foot, having some decent play and some explosive opportunities throughout the game, but just not being able to put it together at the end like they did so much last year. And when they went 11-0 in those one score games, this year we're 1-4 in those different opportunities. And what that sets up is a very interesting dynamic over the course of the next 3 weeks until the Vikings hit the trade deadline on October 31st. So I thought I would take the next 10 or so minutes to just kind of walk through what this looks like and what I think this means for the Vikings and what are their possible courses of action from here that not only looks at the challenges of the 2023 season, Justin Jefferson's relationship with the Vikings, because he still doesn't have a contract, and 2024 and beyond. Because all those are factors if you're sitting at TCO Performance Center in Minnesota trying to decide, if you're sitting in Kwesi Adofo-Mensah's shoes, what do you do? So first and foremost, I would say that there's been a ton of discussion on, Vikings Twitter or Vikings X, if you will, today about this particular topic. And it seems like half the people want to, write it out. They still think we have a chance to win this year. The second half of the schedule is a little soft. They have opportunity to sneak into the playoffs and still want to compete. And then the other half is like, okay, full on tank. Can we get Caleb Williams? Can we get Drake May? Let's do a fire sale. Let's sell Kirk. Let's trade Daniel Hunter. Let's just, go all in on tanking for the season. And I think both of those are a little complicated, and there's a little nuance in this discussion about the way I look forward. So the first thing I want to throw out there and make sure everyone understands that the coaches and players do not tank. There's no tanking from the coaching staff or the players at any point in time. That's just not going to happen. Brian Flores, is suing the NFL and, was fired over his frustrations around the Miami Dolphins potentially tanking a few years ago. Kevin O'Connell, you could just see in this press conferences, he believes in this team. He wants them to win. He thinks that it has success. They were so close. They're doing things on offense. They're turning the ball over. All those have a tendency to be flukes. Obviously, 5 weeks into the season, it's not necessarily just a fluke anymore. I mean, it's something that's actually wrong with the team. But he's never going to stop believing. Those players are never going to stop believing. You're in the NFL. You only have, if you're lucky, you'd say you're a quarterback, you have over a 10-year career. I think the average NFL career is only 3 years for a player. And you are giving it your all every single down, every single game, every single year, because your livelihood depends upon playing well and putting that performance out there on tape so that you can convince either your current employer, your current team to pay you and hold on to you or want to give you a salary increase on another contract, or you're trying out for the other 31 teams in the NFL. Either way, your pride is on the line, and you want to win those games because you only have such a limited opportunity to play in the NFL that you want to take advantage of every single moment, and especially when you know a career is fleeting in NFL. You could be injured on the next play. You could blow up your knee, and then your career is done and over with. So you're never going to not give it your all, and nor should we expect that. I mean, to think that the team is actually going to tank or think about getting a high draft pick so I can be replaced by someone else next year is just not realistic, and it's kind of ignorant for anyone to kind of suggest that. So we can rule out the coaches, and the coaches are fighting for their livelihood too. We can rule out the coaches and the players agreeing to tank every single game for the rest of the season. They're going to be trying their all to put as many points on the board to win every game as possible and prove their performance and make money for their families. That being said, there are people that are employed by the Vikings in the front office, the GM, Rob Brzezinski, who's the cap guru, and there Ryan Grigson, the rest of the front office staff, the scouts, whose job it is to look at the long-term future of the team. They're looking at the next draft class. They're looking at where it's the salary cap. Right now, where's it going to be 2 or 3 years? What are our opportunities to succeed? How are we going to make this team competitive in the long run? Also, how are we going to make them competitive in the short term? I don't think Kwesi Adofo-Mensah and Kevin O'Connell and the Wilfs, for that matter, want to ever give up on a season. That's the last thing they want to do. They only have limited opportunities. The Wilfs want to, they want to see their team succeed. They want to make money. They want to make revenue. They want people in the stands. They want excited. They want to be buying merchandise. If they think there's going to be a fire sale, why would they, buy jerseys of their favorite players, all this stuff. So they never want to punt on a season. But at a certain point, it becomes a reality that, what is the best thing for the future of the team? And does that mean, passing on an opportunity to try to come back this year to make that happen? And so really, I think that the way that the Vikings have set themselves up, they're 1-4 now, and there are 3 games left before the trade deadline. You have at Bears this week, at home on Monday Night Football against the San Francisco 49ers, and then at Green Bay on October 29th before the Halloween trade deadline. It's basically become a 3-game season because let's be real about the prospects here. If they lose to the Bears this week, who are horrible, they have a horrible roster. They looked good against the Commanders last Thursday. But overall, they're not, and they've gone through so much turmoil as an organization this year. I think if the Vikings lose to the Bears, you have to seriously consider just calling out a season, because if you're at 1-5, you're probably not going to make the playoffs, and that probably shows you all you need to know about your chances of coming back and being resilient. So, in fact, it's kind of a 1-game season coming up on Sunday. Now, the Bears are plucky. They had 3 extra days of rest, and it's in Soldier Field, which is always difficult for the Vikings to succeed. So I have serious questions about whether or not we can win that game, but let's just start there. If the Vikings lose that game, then we'll get to some of the options I'll talk about in a minute. Second thing is, even if, let's say they go into Chicago and they beat the Bears. The 49ers they look incredible. They just went in and destroyed the Cowboys. They are fantastic, both on offense and defense. They look like a true powerhouse. The Vikings are going to have to play their absolute best in order to beat the 49ers. And there's been no evidence so far that they can put together a complete game against anyone, let alone, someone like the Panthers, who they struggled against in the first place. And they look like a struggling team this year. So they could go in and shock the 49ers. But I think it's safe to say we can chalk that one up as a loss. So best case scenario right now, we're 2-5, and then heading into Green Bay. And so on before even the JJ stuff and before even the Chiefs game, I tweeted out saying, I think the Green Bay Packers game is going to be the game that determines whether or not they decide to trade assets or not. And I still think that that's true because I think it's very possible that they can be, probably 2-5 heading into the Green Bay game. Now, Green Bay looked pretty bad last night against the Raiders, who are also not a great team. But going into Green Bay could be, difficult. The Packers have the ability to put it together. I really think the season will come down to, if you're 3-5 and you can come back and get to that softer part of the schedule. You could potentially get JJ, back after 5 or 6 games. Win a few. I could see the argument for the Vikings as a franchise wanting to hold on at a 3-5 record and push forward, see if they can't get back to 500 and make a late season push for they still have a bunch of division games ahead of us, to make it into the wild card thing. Like I could understand that. I will not fault them for that. They never want to punt on a season. They believe in their team. There's some underlying analytics that show that they're strong in certain areas, but they just can't get it together. If they were to find a way to somehow put it together and push forward, I could be convinced on that. Like, right, you don't want to punt on the season. Let's do it. That being said, if they're 2-6, that's a completely. I believe that's a clear line of distinction between 2-6 and 3-5. I think 2-6, it'd be nearly impossible to crawl yourself out of the hole because the Lions look good this year, and in order to make the playoffs, you probably need to be 10-7. In the new 17-game season. So for the rest of the year, they would need to go, 8-1. I think that's very difficult to ask, especially if you're shown that you can't beat, you can't win 2 of these next 3 games. I know you don't have JJ, but we don't even know when JJ is going to be back. So I think that's the clear line, and that's what I'd be looking for over the next few weeks. I do not think that the Vikings would really consider making a move until maybe after the San Francisco game or even up to the deadline, because I think that Kevin O'Connell and Kwesi and the Wilfs and everything want to give this team the most opportunity they can to be successful. So I'm putting that as a starting point. So let's talk about, the other conversation that's going around right now, which is, Kirk Cousins. I do not think it's a realistic possibility that they trade Kirk because there's a few factors that need to happen at this point. One, the Vikings need to be completely sure that they want to give up on the season. So maybe that's if they lose to the Bears and lose to San Francisco, and they're suddenly 1-6 and the season's over, and So one, the Vikings have to give up. Two, Kirk Cousins has to be willing to waive his no trade clause, and so he might want to just ride it out with the rest of the season. Doesn't want to move his family. There's any number, or he just thinks he has the best opportunity to improve his value heading into free agency. Maybe he thinks he can do one last ditch effort to re-sign with the Vikings or something after the season. He wants to stay here and see if he can't get it straightened out. Whatever his thinking and rationale might be, he's got to be willing to waive that. I'm not sure if he will, but they're just getting to step 2 that he has to be willing to waive his no trade clause. 3, you have to find a team at this point, a week or 2 from now, that is strong enough to feel like they can get a quarterback, midway through the season, get them up to speed, and then still compete, for the playoffs. And they have to be willing to give up high draft capital because the Vikings aren't just going to give them away. And they have to have enough cap space to take on Kirk's deal. I think it'll be like 5 or 6 million at the trade deadline of Kirk's contract for the rest of the year. And, 3, going back to the no trade clause. I think both Kirk and the acquiring team have to be open to the possibility that Kirk would be their long-term option for the next few years. And really, in my mind, there's either, I think because Aaron Rodgers wants to come back this year and Aaron Rodgers is on a contract for next year, I don't think the Jets are a realistic possibility. I think it's a good talker for the national media, but because of those factors, I just don't think that they're going to pull the trigger on that. And so the team that there's only 2 options in my head that I think are realistic. One is if the Atlanta Falcons, I think, for a number of reasons that if you're watching this podcast, I'm sure you've heard the Falcons rumors. Kirk's wife, Julie Cousins, is from there. I think their in-laws are still there. They got married there. They spent some time in the summer there. And then the team on offense is young. The head coach is Arthur Smith, really needs to win. Desmond Ridder actually looked good last week, but overall this season he hasn't looked the best. And so you have to create a scenario in which Desmond Ridder does not look very good over the next few weeks, but the team is still in contention to try to compete, and they think they can get Kirk up to speed moving forward. The other only option I see is if there is a contending team where their starting quarterback goes down in the next few weeks with a long-term injury, and they need someone for a half-year rental that could potentially keep them afloat. I think potentially if Kirk were to be going to a team that has a real chance to compete, it'd be hard it'd be difficult for him as a competitor to say no to that. But overall, the chances of all this falling into place just correctly, the right trade compensation, the Vikings willing to be give up, Kirk saying yes, all these factors combined, I just think it's unrealistic. I would put it at extremely low probability of happening, maybe like 10 or 15%. I would say even before the Justin Jefferson IR injury, it'd practically be about zero, just because I know Justin Jefferson's a competitor and that, he's going to want someone competent throwing him the ball. But now that he's injured, it just like, ups that just a little bit because they don't need that as an excuse, as much. So I think that unless, I'll come back next Tuesday and I'll talk about, what I think the percent chance is. But as of now, I would say the Kirk Cousins trade stuff is nearly dead in the water. It doesn't mean they shouldn't try. It doesn't mean that they shouldn't be looking into that as a possibility. But I just think that the number of factors that would have to take place for that to actually proceed is very low. The other thing, though, to consider is that there are other players, whether it be Danielle Hunter, Ezra Cleveland. I actually predicted even before the loss and JJ's injury that the Vikings would trade Ezra Cleveland at the deadline, mostly because they have a cluster of quality players at the interior offensive line, which is shocking for me to say. But between Dalton Risner, Garrett Bradbury, Austin Slotman, Blake Brandell, Ed Ingram, who had a good PFF performance, and the possibility of Chris Reed coming back, something's got to give there. And the fact that Ezra Cleveland's on an expiring deal and they haven't shown any interest in bringing him back on an extension so far suggests to me that and then there was rumors that they were potentially willing to trade him back in the late summer, that he could be on the move. And it makes a lot of sense. And there's always teams looking for interior offensive linemen to help push them through. I think that I saw a rumor today that the Cleveland Browns were interested in potentially adding to their offensive line. And Cleveland just makes a lot of sense. It seems like that could be destiny. So, that's a possibility. So Ezra Cleveland, Danielle Hunter, they haven't seemed to show that they want to bring him back on a long-term deal. They did that short-term resolution, in training camp this year. And if they don't want to sign him to a long-term deal, if they can get a third-round pick in the 2023 draft as opposed to 2024, where they probably would get in a comp pick, you probably have to take that. Or if you can get a second-round pick, you probably have to take that if you're in a position where you need to, if you're 2-6 and you're looking to sell. And then the other players, you got to consider, Harrison Smith. I think that would be completely dependent upon Harrison Smith. He's kind of got a legacy no trade clause. You don't want to ever trade a guy who's, a long-term captain of yours and franchise player. That being said, I think he's 34 or 35 years old. He might want to go to a contending team instead of, just going out on a whimper with the Vikings this year. If that's something he's open to and he wants to go try that out, you can't blame him for that. It's, if we can get a late round pick back for him and save some cap space, that could be the best interest of all parties. Then you have guys like KJ Osborne, who with Justin Jefferson and Jordan Addison, I don't think has a big contract coming from the Vikings, coming his way. So he could be a consideration. Someone like Jordan Hicks, who's on a one year cheap contract. The Vikings has actually played pretty well this year. I think he recorded like a 90 PFF grade this past Sunday. You might be able to get a very late round pick, for him as well. And then you just go with Brian Asamoah and Ivan Pace for the rest of the year. And so those guys are possibilities. Overall, I think that the Vikings just have to consider who are those guys on those expiring contracts, who are not part of your long-term plan, and see if you can't get some capital for them. And then that allows opportunities for, younger guys to step up and contribute and see what you have heading into next year. For example, if you traded Harrison Smith, you could see what, maybe Lewis Cine gets more plays. If you traded Jordan Hicks, you help Brian Asamoah, get in there. Maybe if you trade KJ Osborne, you have opportunity to see what Jalen Naylor, has available, or, with Danielle Hunter. I think that DJ Wanham, he could be another trade candidate season last year, but I think Patrick Jones hasn't had the best year, but maybe it's Andre Carter and you see what, he has, or some of the guys on the practice squad. So look at it as an opportunity in, getting a head start on the offseason, put yourself in a slightly better position and see what some of the younger guys can do. Once again, no one's expecting that this team is ever going to not try their best. But if you're the Vikings GM and chances of making the playoffs are slim, and you're constantly evaluating how you're going to proceed moving forward, then it might be best just to move on to a few of these guys, get some better draft capital, and then see how that can help you compete when it comes to trying to find your next franchise quarterback in the draft next April. If you have a little bit more ammunition to trade up, or if you even get a second or third rounder from Danielle Hunter, that can create your opportunities to take what could be a top 10 pick and trade up to get Drake May. Or even if you're in a top 5 pick already or in that position, you've got more capital to reinforce the team and try to look at the 2024, 2025 as being years that you could realistically compete. So the Vikings have put themselves in this position, and I know that Kwesi Adofo-Mensah says that they want to always compete, they want to be great. They want to give themselves as many opportunities to go chase that championship. And that was part of the whole competitive rebuild thing that he was talking about at the beginning of the season. So they always want to be good. I wrote a long article about it. I put on Twitter talking about, what about this philosophy and what it means. But here's the thing. If they want to compete, but they no longer have the option to compete, meaning that they're out of playoff contention, what's the next best thing? Is that you want to look at trying to set yourself up the best to compete in the future. And I know that some, have, competitive integrity and they just want to, ride it out and let the offseason stuff take care of itself. And I think that that's, admirable. But, there's a game within the game. You can love the game on the field, but you can also love the game off the field, and not doing everything you can to help improve your team for the long-term prospects. If your immediate future is non-competitive, then you're just committing malpractice, to your team. And then come, March and April, you're going to wonder, why didn't I do more when I had the chance, when the writing was on the wall? So, sorry, that's kind of my rant for the evening. I think that the next few weeks are going to be very interesting for the Vikings. Really what happens with the Bears this week and what happens with the Packers, I think, are really going to determine, what happens next. They really need to win both of those games, I think, for this season to even have a possibility of being saved. I think if they don't, Justin Jefferson could stay out for an extended period of time. I would add that you should not bring him back any sooner than that hamstring is 110%, because he's your franchise player. And unless you're actually going to be competing for the playoffs or for the Super Bowl, why would you risk anything when it comes to that? If you were in a better position, let's say this team was sitting at 4-1 instead of 1-4 right now, there might be incentive for him to come back when his hamstring is at 80-85%. But there's no motivation right now, and there shouldn't be. And that also should go for the Vikings too, because they need to protect this guy. They aren't able to sign him yet, but he's the cornerstone of their long-term plans, him and whoever quarterback they draft in April. And so, there's no rush to do that. And so if they were able to turn around, they get a 3-5, going a little win streak, and Justin Jefferson's healed, maybe all you optimists out there in your wildest dreams can make a crazy run into the playoffs and be the most memorable story in NFL history of a team starting this bad and making it happen. I have my doubts about that, but overall, whether you're on the optimist side or the let's tear it down and move on side, I think the best thing to consider is what happens over these next 3 weeks. Can they win 2 of them to keep their season alive, or if they're going to go 1-2 or 0-3 in that process? And then I think the choice will be clear. The choice will be made for you, and that you need to do your best to set yourself up for the future. So as always, please tell me how I was wrong. Tweet at me. Let me know your thoughts. I want to thank everyone for joining us today. I want to thank our sponsors, Eastside Jiu-Jitsu, that's Badass Wood Art, and of course, Lake Monster Brewing. I think we're back tomorrow evening for Vikings Happy Hour Wednesday night with the regular crew. So hope to have you guys join us here. It's very interesting times. Just remember, everyone, to stay polite, stay kind when we're discussing these things. Remember, we all want what's best for the team. And Skol Vikings, and I will see you guys next week.